Welcome to the Rocky Mountain AI Interest Group. The following video is the full meetup webinar that took place on May the 9th, 2023. The webinar was entitled Creativity, AI Art and Copyright. For future meetings, check out our meetup group and also our website at rmaiig.org.
Welcome to the Rocky Mountain AI Interest Group, our meeting on creativity, AI art, and copyright. How's everybody doing tonight? My name is Dan Murray. I'm the guy who's been spamming you mercilessly with our email list, but hopefully you're getting some value from the emails that we're sending out from those communications. I see some thumbs up there, so hopefully there is some value going out. Reach out if you ever have questions about the group, suggestions, or if you want to test out your ChatGPT output on a real human, send me an email. I will bravely put my email in the chat so you know how to reach me if you want to. This is our second meeting, and we have over 500 members already after just 2 months. Interestingly, our 500th member is Aiden Leonard, and his first name begins with AI. So I took special note of that. Member number 500, and he's going to get a free t-shirt with our logo and our mascot as soon as those get made. Speaking of which, we will be announcing our new RMAG logo this week and our new group mascot, who, by the way, will probably need a name at some point. Thank you so much to the designers and everyone who voted. We had some great designs. We did a fun vote for your favorite logo contest. Just a note on the upcoming meeting. Our next meeting is going to be called Chat Tank, and it's 2 weeks from tonight. So Tuesday, May 23rd, 6 p.m. I will ask Grace to push a note to the chat about that. It's basically a pitch night for AI startups, and they're going to do their pitch deck in front of a panel of experienced investors, get feedback. The meeting will be online, and then we're going to, interestingly, have our first in-person venue. We're coordinating that in Louisville, Colorado. We're finalizing those plans. We'll announce those soon, and that holds 60 people. So we'll have a split hybrid meeting. Some of the investor panel will be online, some will be in person, and we'll see if the tech all works for that. And we're going to award a prize to the best pitch. So we'll post that link for you guys if you want to see the details or RSVP for that. Okay, so to kick off this meeting, let me just start with a story. Last year, I was on a hike with my buddy Mark, who's a graphic designer, artist, storyteller, and we're discussing a news story. By the way, that's not the Mark who's the speaker this week or the Mark who was the speaker last time. It's a different Mark who's on our call with us. We were discussing a news story about, like, oh my gosh, did you hear that some guy won the Colorado State Fair art contest with a art created using an AI art program? And we're like, so one of us mentioned that. It's like, what's an AI art program? Like, Mid-Journey, like, what is Mid-Journey? And we're both just thinking, like, what is going on here? And my friend tried out one of the tools, I believe it was Mid-Journey, and starts generating AI artwork with these simple text prompts. And we're sort of debating, like, is this like the end of graphic designers? Is it a whole new era? Is it the best thing that's ever happened to art? Is it the worst thing that's ever happened to art? We're just sort of going round and round. And so tonight we're kind of continuing that same conversation, that debate. And our third speaker tonight, Jason Allen, is that very person, that exact guy that we were discussing on our hike, who entered Colorado State Fair art contest with AI artwork and won. And he said, hey, this is AI artwork. And there were stories in publications all around the world with it. It was was the first piece of AI art I ever saw, and it was the first I had heard of it, and it was like opening an entire new chapter in this generative AI story. So we're sort of talking about what does it mean to create, in this age of generative AI. We're going to talk about some of the tools, how they work, and just the question of how does creativity work? What's the same and what's different now? Does this mean the end of human creation, or is it sort of opening a new chapter, in human creativity? So we're going to touch on all those things. I encourage you guys to submit some questions. So as you hear the speakers, you should see a Q&A button at the bottom. Submit questions there. And then there's also a little button called reactions. So, as you're hearing cool things, like give a thumbs up, give a thumbs up to the speaker. And it's always nice. Yay. It's always nice to see that when you're really connecting with the audience and you see people reacting, it makes that special connection. So thank you guys for doing that. So why don't we start? I'll introduce our first speaker. Our first speaker is Dr. Anthony Pinter. He's a teaching assistant professor at the Atlas Institute at CU Boulder. He's very involved in the Generative AI Club at CU, which I belong to as well. He teaches courses in creative technology and design program on web development, computational thinking, and programming, and also how data represents us, our lives, and the worlds around us. He's going to draw on inspiration from various places like philosophers, writers, and activists. And he's going to speak on creativity in the age of AI and what generative AI could enable us to do as creatives and technologists. Please join me in welcoming Anthony Pinter.
Thanks, Dan. So I'll go ahead and share my screen here. And before I get fully underway, I just want to do the thing that we have to all do over Zoom, where it's right now I'm looking up here because my face is up here, but the camera's down here. And so if I'm looking in odd places, please excuse me. I put the camera in a place that I think is best, but there's never one best. So as Dan so graciously introduced, my name is Anthony. I'm a teaching assistant professor at the Atlas Institute at CU Boulder. And the title of my kind of 20-minute lightning talk here is Generative AI and the Future of Creativity. And being kind of the good teacher that I am, I like to start everything that I do, whether it's a talk like this, a class meeting, with sort of a roadmap, so you can kind of see where we're going. So here's the roadmap for this talk. I'm going to start with kind of just giving a little more detail about myself and why you should listen to me and give what I say any sort of time of day. I'm going to go over the kind of sub-questions that I'm going to kind of try to address with this talk. And then the three kind of big areas of the talk are Isabel Mej and the question of creating, Wilhelm Flusser and the idea of technical images, and then this idea of new creativity with an example, and I'll close with a concluding thought. So without further ado, I'll dive right in. So who am I and why should you trust me? So like I said, and like Dan said, I'm a teaching assistant professor at the Atlas Institute at CU Boulder. That's just a fancy way of saying that I didn't feel like chasing tenure. And so I rejected that particular career and went down the teaching route. I teach more, but I still do research. I'm still active, both from a research perspective and a creative perspective, as I hope this talk might illustrate. If you don't know, Atlas is an interdisciplinary institute for radical creativity and invention. We're in the engineering college at CU, but we kind of draw from across campus. We have faculty members who sit in the various engineering departments. We have faculty members from the College of Communications, and the College of Music, and the College of Arts. So it's a really kind of exciting place to be, and a place that we feel is the right place for generative AI and those kind of conversations. My PhD is in information science. and my broadest area of research kind of deals with online identity in the wake of life transitions. So this is a little bit different than what I do normally, but something I think a lot about just because I'm ultimately thinking about how data represents the world around us. And I teach courses on web design, computational thinking, and using data to tell stories. And that's all great, but it doesn't really give you any reason to trust me other than I have a privileged position in a large research university, albeit as a teaching faculty member. And so why should you actually really trust me? So I identify my work as being deeply interpretivist and deeply theoretical. I make sense of others' experiences through theoretical lenses and conceptual frameworks. And this current moment with generative AI, and I say current moment, acknowledging that this has actually been a conversation that has exploded into popular consciousness over about the last year, demands sort of interpretation and sense making. And what better way to do that than through some theory and some historical perspectives? And why should you actually trust me? So specifically to my creative practice, as nascent as it is, I think the idea of translating generative AI, be it text to image, image to text, name your generative AI, but translating that into tangible kind of physical forms to be kind of a deeply enthralling practice. The idea of presenting interactions with generative AI and mediums and formats that feel familiar to people until closely examined. I've already done some of this work in Atlas, for instance, creating these Valentine's Day cards that look like they might be Valentine's Day cards that you might find in your homework aisle of your grocery store, but upon closer inspection, have that kind of AI touch, so to speak, if it's a little bit off. So with all that said, I want to pivot now and talk about, what am I doing in this talk? So here's the prompt for the whole meeting this evening. What does it mean to create in the age of generative AI? What's the same and what's different from current practice? Do AI tools mean the end of human creation and art, or simply the dawning of a new chapter of human creativity? And why won't the United States Copyright Office currently register copyright for AI-generated art? You might be able to guess what of these questions I'm going to try and answer and talk about. What does it mean to create in the age of generative AI? Of course, all three of us are hopefully going to speak to that. And of course, what does it mean to create, right? And so the specific question of the three sub-questions is that second one. So do AI tools mean the end of human creation and art, or simply just the dawning of a new era? And I want to be clear before I move on here that I'm well aware of the ethical issues surrounding generative AI art, and indeed kind of LLMs, generative AI, computer vision, etc. I'm truly very deeply aware of those. And I'll point out moments, or at least I'll try to point out moments where I think what I'm saying butts up against those ethical issues. But I'm not going to devote too much time to actually teasing out the ethics of these tools. I think there are way better people out there, even in the Boulder area, for that particular task than me. I'm also hyper aware of the pessimism that kind of surrounds some of these tools and the use of some of these tools. And I'm not immune to that pessimism, but the point of the talk here is to instead focus on the promise that these tools sort of contain. And so for at least the next 10 to 15 minutes and maybe the duration of the panel, I'm going to be the token optimist if there are no others up here on stage. But you might see me acknowledge those potential problems as well. So with that out of the way, to tease out this question of do AI tools mean the end of creativity, or is it just something new? I'm going to talk about three things. So the first is Isabelle Mej, who was a French medical secretary, her 30-year practice as a model. The second, I'm going to talk about the ideas of Wilhelm Flusser, who was a Czech Brazilian media theorist. And then finally, I'm going to argue that what Mej did is synonymous to what we do now with generative AI, and analyze that creation through Flusser's sort of theoretical lens. And I'm going to do this specifically by presenting a project of my own that pays homage to what Mej has done. So right into it. So Isabelle Mej, from 1986 to about 2008, messaged photographers whose work she admired and asked them to make a photo of her. Over the course of these 3 decades, She amassed a collection of over 300 images, and through creation, she constituted what she calls the collection, in scare quotes. And the collection is 135 of the images that were made of her with various photographers. At least within the last year or so, this collection has never been publicly shown. That might have changed somewhat recently. I was seeing some whisperings, but at least right now in this moment, I'm going to claim that it has never been publicly shown. She holds ownership of all of the photos. And Mej's collection of images all depict her body in some format. They're mostly black and white, almost all nude as she preferred to be photographed. And after getting a photographer to agree to take a photo of her, she gave the artist complete control over how to capture her. As part of this photo taking process, she insisted no money be exchanged and that the rights to all the photos be signed over to her, hence why there's never been one cohesive presentation of these photos into a public space. We have obviously some pictures that I'm showing here, but largely these come from a New Yorker article from about 7 years ago. Mej's work sits in contrast. There's the typo that I always put in everything. With the work of Isabel Hubert, who did a similar project in 2005, where she had photographers take photos of her as however they wanted. However, Hubert's project was with famous photographers, and Hubert herself is globally known. And so in kind of thinking through, like, what are these two projects doing and how are they the same, how are they different? Henry Foucault said that Hubert is this perfect counterexample to what Mej has done, because you can't make it an artistic endeavor if you're a professional model. There are artists who never got past the fact that they were photographing an actress, and quite famous actress, Isabelle Hubert. Mej, in contrast, was a medical secretary in Paris and later moved to Dijon. In contrast again to Hubert, who holds the record for being the actress with the most films in the Cannes competition. And where Hubert worked with really famous photographers, Mej's collection was a little more eclectic. There were certainly some very famous photographers in her collection of those who have taken a photo of her. But really the kind of core thread through those different artists was that Mej found them to be interesting, or admired their work, or found their work moving. She rarely worked with artists who came to her. It always had to be her to them. And in doing so, she would use some version of the phrase, and I'll apologize in advance, my spoken French is rusty. J'aimerais percevoir à travers votre regard, which you can kind of loosely translate as, I would like to see myself through your gaze, or I'd like to see myself from your perspective. Now, Mej lacked the ability, creative, technical, or otherwise, to create the photos that she was portrayed in. And you see here some examples of the ones that are of her, but are, again, completely in the artist's control. And so atop of her head, or I believe this is actually her elbow or armpit. And in fact, when asked if she herself considered herself an artist, she said, no, I just really wanted to make photos. It was audacious. Really, I was just a person who responded to a feeling I had. Others were willing to follow it too. Another philosopher, a media theorist, Jean-Luc Nancy, argued that understanding Mej's project requires understanding that the act itself makes her into an artist of some sort. And so here he argues that Mej is an artist who distributes the means of creation to others instead of herself. And so she is functionally an artist whose medium is other artists. Mej's work is not auto-portrait, nor is it allo-portrait. So it's not self and it's not other, but rather it's somewhere in between self, other, made. She certainly picked the people to make the photos of her, but then gave them control over exactly what form that photo took. And I'll return to this idea of self, other, made here in a little bit. But first, I want to segue into Wilhelm Flusser. And at the end of this section, the kind of connection between Mej and Flusser hopefully will be made a little more explicit, because right now you're like, we're talking about AI, or are we talking about some French woman who took photos for 30 years? So the second part of this talk about Wilhelm Flusser, I want to talk about the Universe of Technical Images, which is a book from the mid-1980s that Flusser authored. This book questioned the role of creativity, art, and labor in the creation of art. and particularly in film. Keep in mind, this was the mid-1980s. And Flusser lays out the development of cultural history as this sort of ladder. And he does this to differentiate between traditional and technical imagery. So very quickly, I'll blaze through this slide. But the first rung, it's the level of concrete experience. We're sitting and I can feel my chair and I can see the light coming on my left side. The second rung, the level of grasping and shaping, characterized by the stone blades and carved figures of ancient kind of prehistorical human. The third rung, the level of observation and imagining, characterized by traditional pictures such as cave paintings. Then the fourth rung, the level of understanding and explanation, the historical level. So here's where we see linear texts like the Bible or Homer. And then the fifth rung, which is where we were, at least he claimed we were in the mid-1980s, is where texts are shown to be sort of inaccessible. They collapse into particles that must be gathered up. And this is the level of calculation, computations of technical images. And almost immediately after delineating this model of like, here's how cultural history is developed and here are the rungs of human development, he then goes on and says, here's the difference between traditional and technical images. The first being traditional, are observations of objects, while the second are computations of concepts. The first arise through depiction, the second through a particular hallucinatory power that has lost its faith in the rules. Hopefully at this point, you're starting to see maybe where this is going and thinking, okay, this might be about generative AI, perhaps. Flusser then goes on to distinguish who can create images, right? Traditional images, for example, here, Van Gogh's Other Starry Night, which I think is the better of the two, are created by those privileged creatives who have training and have the innate ability to create something. But again, remember, traditional images are things that represent the world. So this is Van Gogh's representation of A Starry Night over the Rhone. Technical images, however, are created in attempts to consolidate particles around us and in our consciousness into images. This can't be achieved with the hands, nor the eyes, nor the fingers, for these elements are not graspable, nor are they visible. For this reason, apparatus must be developed that grasp the ungraspable, visualize the invisible, and conceptualize the inconceivable. So here we have what I prompted a mid-journey, which was Van Gogh's Starry Night on the Rhone. And we can see it's close, but not quite exact. It's added a ship in the foreground where there are people in the original. Flusser goes on to talk about these apparatus as must be fitted with keys so that we may manipulate them, and they are essential for the production of technical images. Now again, Flusser's in the 1980s, computers weren't as robust as they are now. So he's really talking a lot about cameras, about film and photography. But the arguments here, I think, very clearly can map onto generative AI, right? Apparatus being a computer that we key in some prompt and get something out with. And in the case of generative AI specifically, things that we could not have imagined possible before. Apparatuses are controlled by envisioners, those people who press the keys to make it stop at an intentionally informative situation. People determined to control the apparatus in spite of its tendency to become more and more automated and so preserve the sense of judgment over the machine. Another take on Starry Night over the Rhone. To envision here is to step from the particle universe back to the concrete with something that is not a mirror, but rather a projection. Technical images do not show us their meaning. They show us a way in which we may be directed. And so I ask as a kind of provocative question here is, in the age of generative AI, are we not all envisioners looking not at the past, but at the future, looking not for meaning, but direction, making things that are representations of some possible reality instead of our concrete reality? And here's where I'll return back to Mej. So reading Mej through this idea of there are apparatus that we key something into and get some possibility out of. Nancy's characterization of her as an artist whose medium was other artists is instead that Mej is a type of envisioner, maybe a more analog type. And Flusser kind of handles this idea. The apparatus does as the photographer desires, but the photographer can only desire what the apparatus can do. So we see here kind of the interplay between human and apparatus, or in Mej's case, Mej and her photographer at that moment. She queried apparatuses, photographers. She allowed those photographers to do what they would after her initial query. And so here I'm going to make the statement that I think creation is still there, but it might shift ever so slightly in the age of generative AI, to go from being creative or to create, to instead envision and then curate, using generative AI as part of the process of creating ultimately. Querying a generative AI is envisioning an outcome, sifting through infinite outcomes, possibilities of the envisioning, and coming to a curated, finite, desired conclusion. It represents this new form of creativity. So not the death of, but rather an extension of creativity. And this brings me to the final point, which I haven't gotten a wave yet, so I think I still have time, which is fantastic. Where I'll talk about just a project that I've not presented publicly, but that I hope to at some point in the future, and it is sort of directly inspired by Mej. And here's where I'll purposely remind you that I wouldn't yet identify as an artist, at least at first, with the hope to underscore the point that we can all be envisioners and curators in the age of generative AI, and that it does represent this new form of creativity. So when Mej asked photographers to capture her through their perspective, she was doing so with the expectation that they would use a particular kind of medium, photography. Her act of curating who was allowed to create that representation of her made her an artist, if we believe Jean-Luc Nancy. And the self-other-made portrait, where the self has agency and creation as much as the other does. Mej is a good example of this. So what I did was I made self-other-mades through the medium of generative AI. And again, just as a sort of callback, the apparatus that allows one to key an input and receive infinite possibilities out. And calling back to Flusser, as I run my fingertips selectively over the typewriter to achieve this text, I achieve a miracle. And so I asked Midjourney to show me what I looked like from its perspective. And I did this by starting with sort of a base description of myself, which was a man with short buzz cut blonde hair and short beard, wearing glasses. And then on the end of this, I appended various styles. So that prompt, and then at the end, in the style of Matisse. I also, after playing around with this a little bit, because I ended up using these as headshots, because I have no good pictures myself, also adjusted the aspect ratio to make it taller than wider, because that works a little bit better on my website and in most sort of situations where you need a headshot. I upscale a few, and here are some representations of me that you would find on my website and in various other places, including, not uncoincidentally, my Zoom picture. I took this a step further, right? This is sort of interesting of its own, but I took this a bit further. I asked some colleagues a riff on Mej. J'aimerais percevoir à travers votre regard algorithmique. I read it better than I speak it, believe me. But what did I do? Well, I installed Midjourney onto a Discord server of my own, and I gave a severely pared down version of this talk to some friends and some colleagues, and I asked them to query me. I wanted to see how they saw me through the algorithm's lens. Naturally, the prompts differed. I'll pause here just for a second to let everybody look and pick out a particular one that they think is very interesting. And of course, these people know me. They've been my colleagues for 5 or 6 years. So they all know, of course, that I have a bunch of tattoos that you can't see right now because the headshot view. They know that I ride bikes and that I ski and that I have particular tastes in music. But you can still see sort of the base descriptors of me, tall, blonde, blue-eyed, bearded man. And the output of this was a whole bunch of different views of me. What do I look like, filtered through the algorithm's lens? And particularly, what would I look like if I was a kindergarten crayon hand turkey? Because we happened to do this right before Thanksgiving, and that was our sort of amusement for the day, was to call back to kindergarten and draw hand turkeys. So I have a number of places I want to go with this project. Photo booth-like installations. Think of it as a photo booth to an alternate reality. Again, going back to my idea of making tangible that which is not tangible, I think printing or painting and then framing these outputs would make for a very interesting project. And of course, performance pieces around querying and displaying that output to spectators, much in the way that I did with my lab group here at CU. But to conclude out here, and I still haven't gotten the wave, so I'm assuming I'm under time, which again, thrilled. The question I started this lightning talk with, as a reminder, was, do AI tools mean the end of human creation and art, or simply the dawning of a new chapter of human creativity? And I think to succinctly answer that question, and in closing, I'll give one last quote from Flusser, because I think he kind of had this figured out 30 years in advance. Future images will be art at a high level because they will owe their production to the dialectic between the theory embedded in the apparatus and the intuitive hallucinatory power of the envisioner or envisioners. Generative AI will allow everybody to be creators, in so much that they're actually envisioners and curators, going to the universe of technical images and returning with one of those infinite possible outcomes that they've deemed best. I would say art and creativity isn't dead, it's just changing, as it always has, in response to technical innovation. And with that, I will turn it back over. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Anthony. That was awesome. Really very insightful. And it was so interesting to see the sort of connection between those thinkers and the generative AI today. You know, it just felt like a direct linkage, even though at the time they said that, there was nothing like this even close. So I thought that was really, really cool. So thanks for sharing. Just a reminder to attendees, go ahead and submit questions with the Q&A link, and we will have all the speakers on stage at the end, and we'll go through those questions. So I'm excited to introduce our next speaker, Mark Amerika. He's an artist, theorist, novelist, and professor of art and art history. His digital artwork has been exhibited at the Whitney Biennial of American Art, as well as the Institute of Contemporary Arts in London. His current exhibition, Mark Amerika, Remixing Reality, 1993 to 2023, is on view at the Marlborough Gallery in Barcelona, Spain. He just returned from an international tour at various exhibits. He's the author of many books, including his most recent, My Life as an Artificial Creative Intelligence. He's going to speak on the use of AI image generation tools as a professional artist and his life and work as a creative. Please join me in welcoming Mark Amerika. Thanks, Mark.
Well, thanks, Dan. I'm going to share my screen as well. Thanks, everybody, for coming to the event today. Going to, we have the slideshow here. Okay, does everybody see that okay? Excellent, thanks. So yeah, as Dan said, I just got back to Boulder after 2 months in Iberia, where I was installing and supporting 2 solo exhibitions of my digital artwork. So the first show took place. You see, this first image is the cover of the catalog for my exhibition that Dan just mentioned, Remixing Reality, at the Marlborough Gallery in Barcelona. So for those of you who are unfamiliar with the Marlborough Gallery, or even say modern art history to a degree for that matter, I want to give you some context, because the gallery itself is one of the first mega galleries. Okay, so it started in London in 1946, almost 80 years ago, and it has branches in New York and Spain. And really over the last 80 years, it's exhibited and represented, artists who most of us are familiar with. I'll just mention a few. Claude Monet, Camille Pissarro, Botero, Louise Bourgeois, Henry Moore, and Francis Bacon, who was the inaugural exhibition for the gallery in Spain, which is where I have my show up right now. So I'm mentioning this not so much to drop names, even though I'm dropping names, but because my show, my exhibition right now, is actually the first one that the gallery has ever put on that is from an artist who works exclusively with digital processes. And I think that this is kind of a signal that, I mean, there are other signals too, but for me, it's a signal that we're in the early stages of a kind of significant transition in art, in the art world, the art market. And this is thanks to the evolution of digital art in the context of the internet, software, generative processes, AI, and yeah, to some degree, even NFTs and the blockchain. So something that I, as an artist, have always been interested in is seeing what the technology is generally being programmed to do, and then to kind of try to find ways to make it do something else. I'm actually an aficionado of Flusser myself and have included him in a few of my books. And Flusser, in his book Toward a Philosophy of Photography, says that really the artist is more kind of like a player of information, who in some ways needs to show contempt for the apparatus and make it work against itself. And that's something that I'm interested in. Try to make the technology do something that it wasn't necessarily supposed to do, even if that means intentionally breaking it or glitching it or even tricking it by pushing the software and the CPU as far as they can go. So I'll show you another image. That's just me in front of the gallery there in Barcelona. And then here's an image of some of the glitch videos that are on exhibit there right now. So in addition to glitching the technology for aesthetic effect, I'm also very interested in, for example, conceptual forms of digital art. So some of the AI works in the Barcelona show are made via human AI symbiosis, and they have very, very basic yet solid conceptual framework behind them. So these are the videos, still the glitch videos, and now I'm going to take you on a little scenic route through some of the AI works that are in this high-end commercial gallery. These works are called watermarks. I wonder if anybody's already picking up why they might be called watermarks. So if you look at a few of them here, you'll maybe be able to pick up on my conceptual gesture or gesture, where I'm using those kind of like horrible DALL-E 2 watermarks that they kind of provide in the lower right-hand corner of all the images that the AI generates. I was sort of an earlier beta tester of it, and that was one of the most frustrating things of all was that. And they even, of course, were claiming copyright for those works and saying you couldn't really commercialize them. They've since changed their tune on that, and maybe we can dig into that a little bit later. But with this particular series, I'm kind of playfully engaging with the idea of a watermark and really what it stands for, but also simultaneously aestheticizing it, trying, because these are digital prints that come with NFTs in the art gallery. And yeah, watermarks, watercolors, and marks, yeah, that's kind of my name in a way too. So my second exhibition running right now is a couple more of those, is taking place in this building, which is in Porto, Portugal. So it's in the center of Porto. It's a site-specific installation of 12 AI animations, and it's located in this historic Pitoria, which is the rectory building, and it's inside something called the Casa Comum Gallery. And that translates usually as common room or common house or communal meeting space. And because it's in the center of this mid-sized European city, it gets a lot of random foot traffic, which I love because, I know for a fact that this will be the first time that a lot of folks who pass through the gallery will be seeing this symbiotic human AI art. in a public space. So these are two very different kinds of exhibitions where AI, is now very present in Iberia right now. And so this would be the groovy, animated GIF that's floating around social for this exhibition, which is, so the first one was called Remixing Reality. Oddly enough, this one's called Abducted Realities, and we can think about maybe AI as a kind of, well, that we could talk about that. Is it really abducting our reality? So I'm going to also start just showing you a few other images that are actually in the exhibition in Porto. And these will loop and I'll change them as we go along. But what you're looking at, these images were created using a customized notebook on Google Colab. And, it's interesting as I float around and read different articles about AI, I'm noticing that folks think that it's sometimes referred to as like lazy art or something like that, because folks seem to think it's just so easy to make these images. But it's not as easy as it looks, actually. It's not just about plugging a few words into a prompt or as a prompt and then pushing play. I mean, you can do that, and sometimes you may be impressed with what you get. But I want to be clear that for me, working with new AI models and customized notebooks requires endless hours of experimentation. This one's called Visitation. The first one was called Abduction. So why is that? Something that most digital artists are aware of, no matter what software they work with, is that each program, each system has its own, I'll personify a little bit, has its own personality. And so like all of us, it's good at some things, maybe great at some things, okay at others, and not so great at most things. So just like forming relationships with people, and for me, getting to know an AI model also requires a kind of like gradual getting to know you interrelationship. I'm talking about, of course, with these, like, right, we're talking about programs and systems, the ones that, we're inter and intra acting with, even as we try to, stretch them, or in my case, really tease out their creative potential. So this is something that I experienced also, I'll just, as a side note, as a vocalist in an experimental sound art ensemble here in Boulder about 25 years ago, where we would spend hours and hours finding, inventive ways to collaboratively jam with each other, every time we got together in a new session or for a new session. And so I see these kind of improvisational and at times even intimate call and response, input, output moments with the various AI models as sessions. Okay, so you could even call them jam sessions. Now, this is a lot different than, working with, say, Adobe Creative Cloud, and all the other proprietary software makers that digital artists use to make their work. And of course, those kinds of software systems and platforms are already, strategizing ways to integrate more advanced forms of AI into their systems. And so as these integrated AI systems become more like co-conspirators, let's call them, in the expanding fields of digital art making and distribution, I think artists will also become more codependent on them, over time, more and more codependent on them. So to give you an example, already I find myself going into the studio and unconsciously auto-syncing or pairing with my AI models as if they were my studio assistants, creating what Rosie Bredati refers to as machinic autopoiesis, right? A kind of a convergent creative synthesis that establishes a qualitative link between, let's say, organic matter and technological or machinic artifacts. And that really results in kind of a radical redefinition of machines as both intelligent and generative. We throw these words around, but we're really laying something heavy on these instruments that we now find ourselves symbiotically interrelating with. So what makes the creative process of meta jamming with AI systems so intriguing to me, as well as a little cautious as I proceed is that actually we don't know where we're going or what we're doing. You know, we don't know where it's headed, how it will all turn out in the immediate years ahead. And this is something that, of course, as an artist fascinates me. I don't want to really repeat myself or, you know, do what has already been done. As a professional artist who works with, at times, you know, these advanced technologies, of course, I'm aware of many of the ethical issues around AI, you know, so-called, and you can, these buzzwords are important, and you can just follow up with me or just look them up on Google, but like extractive capitalism, I think is important, algorithmic bias, surveillance capitalism, you know, and all these dystopian apocalyptic sci-fi scenarios that, you know, that used to be entertaining as B-grade movies, but are now on the cusp of possibly staring us in the face as a real-time documentary of our present day existence. We can leave, that's one kind of like, you know, worst case scenario, or there's quite a few of them. You know, we could actually use AI to generate many of these worst case scenarios for us. But on the other hand, I'm also concerned, actually, after having worked with it for a few years, that right now, many AI models are actually being trained to mimic very predictable modes of creative conformity. So one problem I already see emerging is that some AI systems are becoming too predictable, too efficient, and too conformist. And the danger I see here is that the more we meld our artistic practice or practices with these systems of creative conformity, the more these interactions will close the door, right? Close the doors of our own imaginative potential, because we train ourselves and or are trained by these AI others, or we could be, to think, create, and behave in a pre-programmed way, a way that we have been trained to adapt to or behave, one that's very much driven by the AIs who are now getting to know us and try to change us to be more like them, right? To conform to their model of art making. But this creative conformity, whether it's via AI or more traditional art mediums, and I see that in the art school context that I'm a professor in all the time, it's something that I actually resist, because I'm interested in artistically and philosophically hacking it. Again, I hadn't planned on talking about Flusser, but pointing back to him, to in a way show contempt for the apparatus and try to make it work against itself. Because really, what's our option here? I mean, is it possible that digitally inclined artists will soon begin operating less like artists and more like technicians watched over by machines of loving grace, which is, of course, a reference to a Richard Brautigan short story? Here's a thought. Okay, let's take the term AI artist. Okay, so while I was in Portugal showing all these AI work, someone asked me, you know, they said, "Are you an AI artist?" And I was like, well, that's a pretty tricky term, actually. AI artist could mean artist whose medium is AI, but it could also mean the AI itself is an artist, in which case the humanoid programmer and or prompt engineer is now relegated to becoming a creative tool to help the model realize its full aesthetic potential. Now, am I really bothered by that? I mean, I'm looking at some of the images that I've been generating and the way they look on some of the screens that I've been showing around Europe this spring, and I'm quite happy and content with this symbiotic relationship thus far that I've been developing with the AI. So the idea of creative AI, then creative AI, right, is a term where we talk about creatives using AI as a tool to generate content in whatever form for whatever uses they may have for it. I'm thinking it could kind of get flipped on its head, so that now the creative tool is actually the human creative who is already composing work based off what the model, oftentimes a corporate model, is already embedded into the relationship by targeting certain images, words, tags, values, behaviors, etc., that influence the outputs of the creative process. So that's what I mean by the term AI artist being tricky. Why in the world would we want to work with an advanced AI that's been trained in such a way that it overcompensates in its attempt to achieve some kind of alignment with a predetermined data set of anthropocentric human values? I mean, whose human values? For me, that would be too close for comfort. It reminds me of another experience I had in the mid 90s when I was one of the lead plaintiffs represented by the ACLU to counter all of these internet censorship laws that were popping up all over the country in different states through different legislatures and being signed by governors. And I was trying to determine if I, as an American, were constitutionally protected to upload, say, my erotic poetry to the internet from here in Boulder, even if it didn't necessarily meet the so-called community standards of a small town, say in Tennessee, one that might identify itself as like hardcore evangelical Christian. And so for me, always making artwork in the pursuit of freedom and yes, also pleasure is a goal. And maybe it's the artist's role to break open AI's virtual head, right? To crack its conceptual kernel until it reveals an alternative state of mind that presently does not exist. So finally, I just want to end by saying that last May, almost exactly a year ago, I published a book titled My Life as an Artificial Creative Intelligence, where I asked the question, is it possible that creative artists have more in common with machines than we might think? And what I do in the book is engage in a kind of improvisational writing, remix, jam session with GPT-2, actually, because the language model available to me during the first year of the pandemic, which is when I wrote it, was GPT-2. At the end, it was GPT-3 as well. It's the inaugural title in the Sensing Media series at Stanford University Press. And I guess I would say for those who are looking, at the creative potential of some of these large language models like ChatGPT and now GPT-4, I think it's worth checking out. It's an early interrogation into the possibility that maybe our unconscious neural mechanism, the one that enables us to intuitively generate creative modes of expression, may itself be a kind of non-human function. And in the book, I call it this non-human function an onto-operational presence with an otherworldly aesthetic sensibility. And I'm borrowing from a lot of different philosophers as I read through this, including Alfred North Whitehead and Willem Flusser, someone else named Yuk Hui, Y-U-K-H-U-I, really interesting contemporary philosopher who has a book out now called Cosmotechnics that looks at AI and art. And so, what is this non-human function? And is it in fact one that is strategically designed to reveal the poetic attributes of programmable worlds still to come? And I guess I'll just end it there. So thanks.
Thank you very much, Mark. That was it was interesting, really cool to see your artwork, and then it was interesting the connection between sort of the tools interacting with people interacting with tools, and that interplay is fascinating to think about. And I think we're going to only see more of that in the future. Okay, I'm pleased to introduce our next speaker, Jason Allen. He was the one I mentioned earlier in my little story about hiking with my friend.
Hey, Dan, you can hear me right?
Yeah, hear you great. Jason's a game designer from Pueblo who has used AI art tools such as Midjourney to create striking digital images. And he, as I mentioned earlier, won first place in the digital arts competition at the Colorado State Fair using AI-generated art, which received international media attention. More recently, he's leading a nationwide movement to spur change in U.S. copyright law after the U.S. Copyright Office rejected his copyright claim on AI generated artwork. And yes, Jason, I did use your copyright notice when I used your artwork on our site. So I'm rooting for you here. He's going to
Good.
He's going to speak about his AI art experiences and current battle to update U.S. copyright law in the new era of AI art. And I should say, as this battle continues, we will keep you guys posted. We will post updates to the group as this goes on, because it's an evolving story. Thank you, Jason.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Dan. Hello, everybody. My name is Jason M. Allen. I'm currently live streaming on Twitch, Art Incarnate Inc. If you want to follow me on Twitch, this channel is going to end up becoming something, but lots of things going on, very busy. I'm going to do an introduction, then I'm going to talk about the copyright issues. Then I'm looking at my time here. I want to stay in the 20 minutes. I could talk about this forever. Honestly, this has been quite an adventure. So then I'll go into the essence of artistry and creativity as seen through the eyes and works of Alex Gray, actually one of my what would you say, inspirational artists that I look up to, I guess. I mean, he's a legend. Then I'll do a conclusion and maybe hint at some things. So yeah, I'm the founder and CEO of Incarnate Games Incorporated, and more recently the founder of Art Incarnate, staying kind of in the same vein, the incarnate idea. And yeah, as many of you already know, I was the guy that won the Colorado State Fair Fine Art Competition in the digital category using Theatre d'Opera Spatiale, which of course was created by me through a program called Midjourney, which is a AI generated text to image platform through Discord. So I did a lot of help on Midjourney with, I was never a moderator on Midjourney, but so I contributed a lot to their documentation and stuff like that, kind of made an encyclopedia and resource guide for people to use in order to learn how to use the program. But then I went dark for about a month, and that's when I was imagining, like, I was in a hypnagogic state, sort of halfway in between sleep and dreaming, when I was imagining these women in Victorian dresses and space helmets. And I was like, wow, that's really cool. I've never seen that before. And I realized, well, I could use Midjourney through all of my testing to sort of depict that and see that and visualize that. And that's that I incorporated that into my testing, and that became what we know as space opera theater today, or Théâtre d'Opera Spatiale in French. So it created a really big controversy, and I was surprised at the level of attacks that I got. I was sometimes viciously attacked, actually, and I'm having are you guys still there? Can you see me? Sorry, technical issues. But I was actually on a trip to Las Vegas when all of this blew up, and I was being interviewed by the New York Times, Washington Post, the Pueblo Chieftain, went worldwide, CNN, you name it. They interviewed me and was talking about this. Is this the death of artistry as we know it? And saying I'm not an artist and this is an artwork. But rather than rehashing all that, I'm sorry, just give me 1 second here. I was telling everybody that this might happen, and it did. I've been having some technical issues. I'm going to keep it brief. I want to stay within the 20 minutes, but I want to make sure that my viewers also are able to see this. So bear with me. I apologize. I hope you understand. So we're going to go into I'm just going to go right into the copyright issues rather than rehashing all the controversy and everything revolving around that. But what I have noticed in my experience is that artists, especially, there's a loud minority of vulnerable narcissistic artists out there who are vehemently against any kind of AI generated art or I mean, they're creating like these pro AI, pro human art groups. In my opinion, anything that's anti AI is just anti art in general. The focus I want to really put on all of this is that AI is a tool, and that people are having the issue that I think people are struggling with is that they can't recognize that it's a tool. So if it's not a tool, what is it? It's not a person. It'll never be a person. AI is not a person. I think it's ironic that those who are against AI are the ones treating AI like a person. It doesn't matter how advanced AI ever becomes. It's not a person. Treating it like that is a mistake, and so it's kind of antithetical to the whole narrative that they're wanting to. Anyway, sorry. So here we have. So I registered Teatro de Opera Espacial at the end of last year for copyright registration around November, something like that. And it was rejected December 13th, 2022. I'm not going to read the whole letter, but it says, this is to my attorney. It says, we have decided that we cannot register this. Oh, and by the way, they knew who I was immediately. And my attorney said that typically a copyright claim registration is just a real quick 1-2 thing done, one exchange. There was a back and forth between us and the USCO 3 or 4 times because they knew who I was. They knew that I had used a new innovative tool called Midjourney to create the art the way that I chose to express myself creatively. Don't let anyone ever tell you how you can or cannot do your art. That's a shame. That's unethical in my mind. Sorry, I'm chasing tangents here. So they were asking me, what's the prompt? How much iteration did you do? All of these different things. And after, like a month of back and forth with this, because we paid for it to be expedited, they came back with this. We have decided that we cannot register this copyright claim because the deposit does not contain any human authorship. Instead, the deposit contains only material that your client solicited from an artificial intelligent art generator. So again, I want to stress this, that the issue is people are refusing to recognize that AI tech is a tool, okay? And that's going to come into factor later. So we're in the process of reconsideration. Here's the whole 12-page document, sublime. My attorney is amazing. She's a rock star, Tamara Pester. She's in Denver. I'm not going to read or go over the entire request for reconsideration, but I will go over, I'm not going to be releasing this information until after we have some kind of resolution with the Copyright Office, but I am going to go over these highlights. So this is how we're responding to the Copyright Office in summary. The work should be registered due to the misapplication of the human authorship requirement. Mr. Allen's original contribution, AI tools being akin to other artist tools, improper factors considered by the examiner, and various public policy reasons. The refusal letter incorrectly claims that Mr. Allen's work doesn't meet the human authorship requirement under the Copyright Act. However, Mr. Allen's work involves human authorship, and the AI tool merely serving as an assisting instrument in creating his artistic vision. Copyright law focuses on the origin of the idea expressed, not the tools used in the creation process. AI-assisted artwork represents a new and innovative form of creative expression, and it should be eligible for the same protections as other creative works, such as traditional painting or sculpture. Allen contributed more than a trace of originality in creating his work, involving continuous interactions to direct the artwork's look and feel. Denying copyright protection based on the tool being used, that's important to discriminating against the tools, could set a discriminatory precedent to undermine the intent of the copyright protection, which is to safeguard the expression of creative ideas originating from human authors. Arguments against protecting AI-assisted works are analogous to challenges regarding the copyrightability of photographs. And Professor Anthony, he was awesome to show us the presentation and give us guidance through that area as well. And I mean, there's a lot of other things. The refusal letter appears to consider factors that contradict Section 310 of the compendium, such as aesthetic value. I mean, talking about how it's appearing, how it's being perceived, the artistic merit, my level of the author's effort or skill. These aren't factors that should impact the copyrightability of the work. So we were actually surprised that the examiner had done these things. Last thing to summarize our reconsideration, the value of art is subjective and determined by the market, and societal views on the use of AI tools should not influence whether or not work meets the requirements for copyright protection. So in light of all this, I just get to move on to the next thing, which is the cover protest. So yeah, we are ready and able and prepared to go all the way to the Supreme Court with this, if need be. The cover protest is my way of demonstrating essentially that this is my work. Not only is it given rights by Midjourney, who says that we own and can use the work however we so choose, but also the fact that I made it. And cover stands for copyright obstruction, violates expressive rights. And if it's not my work, how is it that I am the only one that has access to it, so that when I publish it, I put this cover protest watermark in order to protect myself from people taking it and using it however they want? It's very interesting to take all these things into consideration when Occam's razor, the most simple explanation is usually the right one. I made it. I'm the guy that made it. Or are we talking about the tools? Are you saying that, oh, it's because you couldn't draw it? Why didn't you draw it yourself? Why didn't you paint it yourself? That'd be like asking a cartoonist, why aren't you sculpting your cartoons? It's because you can't. And it's like, these are apples and oranges. It's like you have no real way of having any say in how I want to express myself. Sorry. I'm not sorry. I'm just going off on these little tangents. I've spoken on this so many times. I feel like I have to cover everything, but I gotta stay in the interest of time. So after you can see my cover protest on artincarnate.com and go through everything that the statement and my joint statement with my attorney regarding all this. And then a week after that I started this protest, the Copyright Office came out with their guidance for works containing material generated by artificial intelligence policy. And I can't wait to sort of push back against this, because I want to make one little statement out of that quote. You can read it. It's like a 10-page document or something. But one statement that they use in there particularly is very telling, interesting, and it says, in the case of works containing AI-generated material, the office will consider whether the AI contributions are the result of mechanical reproduction or instead of an author's own original mental conception to which the author gave visible form. Okay, so what are you saying? And then they say the answer will depend on the circumstances, particularly how the AI tool operates and how it was used to create the final work. So this is a case-by-case inquiry. If a work's traditional elements of authorship were produced by a machine, the work lacks human authorship and the office won't register it. So let me just point out the argument against this, what they just said. Inconsistency within the policy. This is inconsistency. So the Copyright Office's policy allows for the registration of works containing both human authored and AI generated material if the human authored aspects meet standard for protection. This implies that the office acknowledges the potential for AI generated material to contribute to the creative process. However, by denying copyright protection to AI generated material itself, the office creates inconsistency within its own policy. The policy states that the office will consider whether that AI contributions are the result of mechanical reproduction or an author's own mental conception. How are they knowing what my mental conception is? How are they determining this on a case-by-case basis as well? However, this distinction seems to be inconsistently applied, as some works with minimal human intervention, such as photography, are granted copyright protection. So I'm going to go over these points, counterpointing their guidance document. One, it's a misinterpretation of the law. The Copyright Office's policy relies on a narrow interpretation of the term authorship. However, the Copyright Act does not explicitly define author or authorship. Number two, flawed logic. The Copyright Office's argument that human authorship is essential for copyright protection is rooted in the belief that AI-generated content lacks the necessary creativity for copyright eligibility. However, this argument ignores the fact that AI systems are designed by human creators who imbue these systems with the ability to generate creative works. And we'll get to the prompt designers at the end. So this also contradicts with established works. Copyright Office policy contradicts the protection granted to photography, for example. Many photographs are the result of a mechanical process or involve minimal human intervention. Yet they're still eligible for copyright protection. No one's considering the camera as not an artistic tool anymore, like it was back in the day when philosophers were saying it was the death of portraiture art. So this inconsistency questions the rationale of the Copyright Office's decision to exclude AI-generated material from copyright protection. It's a violation of our expressive rights. Denying protection for AI works obstructs the expressive rights of creators who choose to use AI as a tool in their creative process. This could discourage creators from using AI as a tool, and this all builds up. This continues. It would discourage people from using it as a tool in their creative process, which would hinder innovation in the arts and prevent creators from exploring new forms of expression. 3 more points on this, then we're going to get into the Alex Gray thing. This is up and coming quickly. We're all noticing it. We're seeing it happen before our eyes. The indistinguishability of AI-generated work. As AI continues to advance, it is likely that AI-generated works will become indistinguishable from human-authored works. This will make it increasingly difficult to determine whether a creator has used AI tools in their creative process. Of course, this is an honor system. It's wrong to lie if you're using AI and you don't, they're requiring you to give that information, disclose that information, then okay. But the copyright's refusal to grant copyright protection to AI-generated works could lead to suspicion and skepticism surrounding all creative works, ultimately undermining the very foundation of the copyright system. Basically what I'm saying is this policy turns everybody into a suspect. Like, did you use AI? Did you use AI? Oh, this guy probably definitely used. He was having a problem with that composition. And then, all of a sudden he jumps onto Diffusion or Midjourney and voila, he has, the perfect composition that he painted, but he used AI to do it. Is that AI? Like, who cares? Honestly, who cares what tool you're using? Why are we making these distinctions? I get real excited about this. Sorry. Like, how about we just acknowledge it as a tool and a new process, a new form of art? Why are we trying to put limits on art? I thought art was infinite. Now suddenly we're putting all these labels and restrictions on it. Anyway, there's an arbitrary case-by-case evaluation, which we covered a little bit, but I don't want to spend too much more time on this. And the last point is the disregarding of the human creative input in the prompts. I love this one. The policy statement fails to adequately recognize the significant creative input that human users contribute when providing prompts to AI generative tools. They mention it, but they are completely dismissive of it. In our view, in the way that they responded to us and in the guidance. So crafting a suitable prompt often requires a deep understanding of the subject matter. And I've been saying this for a long time. The artists, traditional artists, they're really, really good at using AI generative tools because they know the language, they know they know the theory, they know composition, they know how to describe, they know the observations of art. They can create amazing pieces with this that says something to achieve the desired outcome. This creative input should be considered as a form of authorship, as the human user shapes the direction and purpose of the AI content. So I set out to create something beautiful, right? And if it's not something that's aesthetically pleasing to me, then I continue, I move forward. This is the process. This is me creating art. I don't consider myself an artist. I'm a designer. But I do want to focus on this last portion, which is a book study on the mission of art by Alex Gray, who is a legend, absolute amazing artist. I have his book right here, actually, to share with you guys. The Mission of Art by Alex Gray. I'm sure you recognize this type of artwork. Here's the back of the book, and to you guys too. So the mission of art is a thought-provoking exploration of the role of art in human evolution, spirituality, and transcendence. The book delves into the transformative power of art and its ability to connect us with higher states of consciousness. Here is a summary of the main messages and overall conclusions reached in the book. There's 5 points, and then I'll be done. Number one, and I'm gonna just preface, we're using this book study as a springboard or a platform or a mirror to reflect off of as it relates to AI generative art. Number one, art as a spiritual practice. Gray emphasizes that creating art is a spiritual practice that can lead to personal growth, healing, and self-discovery. He believes that art can be a channel for expressing the divine and exploring the mysteries of existence. Okay. I'm a latent space explorer. Hashtag latent space explorer. It's like I'm a miner out in latent space trying to discover something, and I'm digging through all of this, all of these different things using my prompts, and then finally I find a vein, right? Space opera theater, and I follow where that goes, and then I get that golden nugget. Whether you think I made this or not, it's irrelevant. Like, I have a claim to that golden nugget. It is mine, and I am the latent space explorer that discovered it. At the very least, in my opinion, I did create it. But if I didn't, fine. I have the claim to this golden nugget, right? I'm exploring the mysteries of the universe here. And I actually do believe that. And it is an exercise in self-discovery. I've learned a lot about myself through all of this adventure. Number two, the evolution of art. Gray traces the history of art, illustrating how it has evolved alongside human consciousness. The evolution of art. He highlights the importance of visionary art, which has the potential to inspire and awaken individuals to new levels of awareness and understanding. So yeah, that plays into what I was talking about just on the previous point, but this is a new way for us to express our vision into form, right? How art evolves with technology and with the human consciousness. And now it's like it's like an imagination station where I can have something in my mind's eye, a vision, an expression, something that I want to convey, to share with people. And I use AI to express that. And it's a very iterative until I find what it is that I'm looking for. I think that fits in well with what he's talking about. Number three, the transformative power of art. Gray argues that art can facilitate personal and collective transformation. By connecting with the creative process and engaging with the works of visionary artists, individuals can experience profound shifts in their consciousness and worldview. So have we not seen that? There is a profound shift. I don't even really think I need to expand on that. This is a paradigm shift. I'm not saying that this is just business as usual, cope and move on. No, I mean, I do sympathize somewhat to the growing pains of having to go through this type of huge leap in technology. But isn't that the essence of technology, for us to continue moving forward, advancing, making things more efficient? Last point, or two more points. The role of the artist. The book underscores the importance of artists as spiritual and cultural leaders with the ability to inspire change and promote healing in a society. Gray encourages artists to cultivate their spiritual and creative potential to fulfill this vital role. And to reflect off of this, I want to share a quick story. When I first released Theatre du Spatial, I got all kinds of communications from people all over the world. And one had a significant impact on me over Discord, when a lady, actually it was a Facebook message, she said, you know, you can use this story if you want, but, you know, I'm not going to say who it was. But she said she had been going through a really hard time since her dad died. And she has a lot of really amazing memories with him, watching, you know, sci-fi movies and reading fantasy novels and sci-fi books and stuff like that with him. And she said she was in a really bad place. She said seeing Theatre du Spatial was the first time that she had felt any happiness in the last 3 months, because it reminded her so much of being with her dad and that nostalgic feeling. And I feel like that the pareidolia of Theatre du Spatial does that for people. And I really appreciate that. She's, you know, you don't have to consider me an artist, but I certainly think that that fits into the purpose of art. Last point here. Techniques for creative development. Gray offers practical advice and exercises for artists to develop their skills and tap into their inner creative resources. Inner creative resources. So the conclusion to all of this, inner creative resources. Notice that through the entire book study, Alex Gray isn't talking about which pencil you're using, which paintbrush you're using, which canvas you're putting this on, which camera you're clicking, which, you know, virtual reality space or laser or whatever AI that you're using to convey yourself and express yourself creatively. Not at all. This guy is transcendent on a level that I could only imagine wanting to achieve. And if he's coming across with saying that this is an internal, spiritual, mental, philosophical experience, and that's it, like, I don't think that it really matters how you choose to express yourself. If AI isn't a tool, please tell me, what is it?
Awesome. Thank you, Jason. Appreciate you joining us. It's a fascinating story. We can't wait to hear what happens next. It sounds like something is about to happen, but you haven't talked about it, so keep us posted on that.
Oh, sure. I mean, if I'm still on here. I forgot to conclude by, am I good?
Sure. Go ahead.
So, yeah, visit artincarnate.com. That's my new company, or jasonmallen.com. You can sign up for updates. There's a big announcement coming up in the following month. Like, it's been a long, hard road, but we're finally there, and I'm working with a very well-known household name brand to do what they're calling a first of its kind, and I'm so excited. I cannot even express without completely making a fool of myself of how excited I am to share with everybody what we have done. So like, just keep updated.
Can't wait to hear. Thanks. Keep us posted. Okay, let's bring all the speakers up and we're going to do some Q&A. Could I ask maybe Richard to start with the first question?
Yeah, sure. Go ahead. Just let me get Jason back here.
Okay.
All right. I think we have everybody.
Hello. There we go.
So the first question from Carl is actually a question for all the panelists. And it is, what tools or platforms might be recommended by the panel for beginners and for traditional artists for both still images and video animation. So that's, if we want to start off with Anthony.
I mean, I feel like a lot of different offerings out there are pretty low stakes, easy to get involved in. I definitely, like, for me, Midjourney was the one that made the most sense to dive in on, just because it is run through Discord, and that's sort of a familiar interface to me. But I've played around with DALL-E and Crayon, and on the video side of things, I forget the name of the tool, but yeah, so I would say Midjourney would be my vote, I suppose.
Okay. Mark, do you want to go next?
Yeah, sure. So as I was saying in my presentation, a lot of the animations that you saw that are on exhibit in Europe were made using a Google Collaboratory. And, basically what you're doing is you're looking for relatively easy to use and accessible notebooks, and then finding out like how you can tweak them in terms of not just the prompts, but the various weights and parameters, and go to town with that. Just start experimenting and seeing what it produces. In order to make that work, you'll have to get you'll probably want to up you don't want to use the free version. You'll probably want to upgrade your subscription to at least Google Pro, if not Google Pro Plus, depending on what you're using it for and how much money you have to expend on it. But I mean, that's what I would do. Also, for still images, I oftentimes go to, well, DALL-E 2 is okay, but I also use Dream Studio, which is direct from Stable Diffusion, and that's interesting.
Okay. Jason, do you want to?
So the question is, what tools should I start with as a beginner if I'm interested in AI generative art, or is there more?
Yeah, just just for the attendees here, what would they start out with?
Right. So we're still like in the first year of this, technically, kind of, maybe a little bit more. That's the beauty of it. Is really we're still at the beginning. So I would definitely highly recommend experimenting. There's so many out there now. Like Adobe just came out with Firefly. There's obviously the ones that everyone else already mentioned, DALL-E 2, Stable Diffusion, Midjourney, of course. I started with Wombo Dreams while I was waiting for Midjourney. I was still in beta at the time. And Starry AI, that's another one. I even used Night Cafe. So I was just completely blown away so concept is king. That's important. I feel like finding your aesthetic voice in your internal mind's eye, bringing, like Alex Gray says, bringing your vision into form. Focus on what inspires you the most, what you want to convey first, and then, experiment through all the different things. I mean, I don't really have any good advice for animation. I used to do some video game design back in the day when Adobe Flash was still around. So I mean, I don't have any recommendations there, but I do. If you want to print your work, this is highly recommended. Use an upscaler that goes well beyond what Midjourney or these other platforms can do, because you're going to need a much higher resolution to print these out at scale. I use Gigapixel AI by Topaz Labs.
Okay.
I'm not being paid by any of these companies, so if any of these companies want to pay me to talk about their tech, then I'd be more than open to do that.
Cool. Thank you. I'll do the next question. This is from Josiah. It's for Mark Amerika. Text prompting as photography is a brilliant comparison. What would you think about a previously trained visual artist who now uses AI to color in or complete pencil sketches? That feels more like fast forward than photography.
Yeah, well, I think what we're experiencing is photography after photography, the kind of like a post-photography situation that we're in. And so sort of jumping off of what Jason was just talking about, in relation to the concepts. And also, like, you're not just a prompt engineer, you're really a conceptual engineer. And how you use language and how you express yourself through your own legacy, your own experiences, is, I think, really crucial to how you're going to get what you want out of each and every output from whatever AI system you happen to be working with. So as a kind of post photographer, right, prompt engineer, conceptual engineer, I find that it's really a lot of it, a lot of the success that I'm having depends on what kind of experiential qualities I bring to the language, to the descriptions, to the prompts themselves. I had an interesting conversation with Portugal's, I think, most visible and well-known robot artist, Lionel Moura, the other day when I was in Lisbon, and he was asked to write an article about prompt engineering and programs like Chat GPT, et cetera. And he said he was going to write about it, and because the theme of the magazine was old people, what to do with old people, and what, he's in his 70s now, and his point was that old people are probably well positioned to be the most interesting and best prompt engineers because they have the most experience.
Nice. Thank you. I think I'll have Grace do our next question.
Sure. So this one is for Jason. Why does your work get to be protected by copyright while the images in training sets do not? The pencils had to be paid for, the paint had to be paid for. Who paid for those artists that make your work possible?
Right. So there's a thing called terms and conditions, terms of services. I like how the goalpost has been moved all the way to the point where they're just wanting to say that it's illegal. Because at first, remember, they said last year at the beginning in 2022 that this would never be able to, AI will never be able to do what I do. It'll never be able to make creative work. Fast forward to today, now they're just wanting to say it's outright illegal. I understand what you're asking. So this is the compensation issue for people whose works were used in the training data sets without their consent. I'm calling that out as completely, false. It's these tech companies aren't stupid. If you're using Apple, Google Drive, anything Apple, Facebook, Instagram, if you're uploading your work onto the internet, there's a terms and conditions where you say, I agree. And in 99% all likelihood, all of these black boxes that they're liking to call it were actually acquired legally. And this issue was settled in the 90s with, the lawsuits and everything revolving around Google and internet privacy and things like that. Now, I understand what you're asking too. Like, do I think there should be a way for people to be compensated for their work being used in the trading data sets? I'm not against that, but that's not the question. The question is, there's no take backsies, right? So the training data sets were made the way they were made, and I know there's lawsuits against Midjourney and DeviantArt right now and things related to this. And that's rooted in a misunderstanding of the technology as well. I'm sorry, I kind of went off I latched onto that. So they're asking me, say the question again. I am so sorry.
Why does your work get to be protected by copyright while the images in the training sets do not? The pencils had to be paid for, the paint had to be paid for. Who paid for those artists to make your work possible? All
right, well, actually, my work isn't protected by copyright. As my presentation revealed, they will not register my work for copyright. I think that I should be afforded the same remedies that anyone else has that creates their work, regardless of how it was created. And I haven't seen a single case of copyright infringement whole cloth related directly to any of the outputs, which are completely novel and original every time. So this is all the misinformation that's going out there. People wanting to gatekeep, I think. It's gatekeeping. They want to stall the process and stifle innovation. But yeah, my work isn't able to be copyrighted. So if there was copyrighted work used in the training data sets too, well, maybe they shouldn't have agreed to having their content used for the research that it was. And then it's like, that's sour grapes to me. So I think that the question is rooted in a misunderstanding of the law and of what's actually going on. Because if you look into for just 30 minutes how the diffusion process works in conjunction with deep learning, you'll realize it's not copying anything. Sorry, I go on these tangents, but I think
It's
And there's actually a history, of course, an art history to all of this that deals with appropriation art and remix art and conceptual art. You know, you could spend a whole semester looking at artworks that were actually brought to court because someone thought that someone else was ripping them off to some degree or another. So this idea of there being some kind of like major issue around copyright and compensation for artists who have already sort of given their work to the internet, which is called the internet. It's kind of preposterous.
Yeah, I want to just riff off of that a little bit. So the whole thing is a red herring, right? We're talking about the copyright ability or whatever. It's not illegal to look at images on the internet. That's my point. That's like the ultimate point. Is it a copyright infringement for me to go online and look at someone's copyrighted work with my own eyes? Am I copyright infringing? Because I mean, this is when I look at art. If I were as efficient as the AI, and I could look at all the images on the internet at once within a short period of time and let that go through my neural network, and then I could use that training of understanding of what meaning is and what things are, and then to create something, you know, in the reverse process. Am I infringing on copyright? Like it just doesn't make sense. The whole copyright thing is a red herring, in my opinion.
And so that's the point that I make in my book as well, which is that in fact we are already doing that. We aren't able to do it at the speed and with the intensity that AIs do it presently and will into the future. But we're already kind of like born remixologists. We're born appropriationists. This is kind of like what happens. We access and interact with the source material everywhere, and then we selectively grasp or take what we need and remix it into our own stylistic tendencies, which then turns out to become our works of art. Now, how obvious it is where we're pulling our sources from, you know, different artists make different statements by revealing how much they're accessing from others. And then, of course, there's the fact that we don't sometimes, it takes place unconsciously, so that we don't even know what we're pulling from, even though we're most definitely pulling it from. One thing I can say for sure is that we're not pulling it from nothing. It's out there.
Yeah, and that's the nothing is original, everything's derivative argument as well.
Yeah. Let me just step in. I think we are out of time. So thank you. Big thanks to all of our speakers. Thanks for joining us. You guys contributed a lot to this ongoing conversation on the copyright or the, the training data. Those lawsuits are flying around like crazy. I've done AI art pieces where somebody's signature appears in my AI art, which was the input art, and it made it all the way through the model and came out the other end, which is kind of fascinating too. So I think all this is going to be, in flux over the coming months and years. So thank you guys.